In the early 21st century, in a snug village of wood frame homes and quiet streets, tucked inside New York State's sprawling Adirondack Park, the past lies either just beneath the surface of things or in plain view. In Saranac Lake, history speaks loudly. The history particularly of a time stretching from the 1880s to the 1950s, when tuberculosis killed millions across America. Legions of sufferers of the terrible disease came to the village to breathe its crisp mountain air, scented by pine, spruce, and balsam, and to be cured if they were lucky. All over Saranac Lake and in nearby towns, structures were built to house the sick, and others were modified with the addition of so-called cure porches. In the village, curing TB, or trying to, became a literal cottage industry. Much of the material legacy of the era remains today. Villagers live in the midst of their history, think of it and speak of it every day.
The feeling that this place, this town, is filled with ghosts, as it were. I mean, that's one of the reasons I love it. I wouldn't have come here if it weren't for the whole curing aspect. That was what got me. When you see the really old photographs of folks curing, they're just in regular chairs and they're sort of tilted back and they've got some sort of ottoman or they're using another chair facing them. And I guess when people thought, it's a business, they started making the recliner chairs. So they'd be out on porches, 10 and 12 people on a freezing cold porch. They're really comfortable. They have the little springs, and yeah, they're not bad. And people basically lived in their chairs.
Some of them would spend years, all day, every day, in one of these things and manage to live through it. That would be most unusual now.
Of all the sufferers who came to Saranac Lake, surely the most eloquent was Adelaide Crapsey. Raised in Rochester, New York, Adelaide was a graduate of Vassar College and an instructor in poetics at Smith College in Massachusetts. Doctors diagnosed her with an advanced case of tuberculosis at age 33. On the 9th of September 1913, she arrived to take the cure at Miss Lucy's cottage on Clinton Avenue.
She cured here in Saranac Lake for the last year of her life and then returned to Rochester, where she was from, and died there at the age of 36. So she wrote poetry and really became famous after her death. Somebody who really admired her work was Carl Sandburg, and he wrote a poem about her that was published a few years after she died, and that really helped make her famous. And a book of her poetry was published after her death, and it included a poem that she wrote from her porch here in this house, and it was called "To the Dead in the Graveyard Underneath My Window."
How can you lie so still? All day I watch, and never a blade of all the green sod moves, to show where restlessly you toss and turn, and fling a desperate arm or draw up knees, stiffened and aching from their long disuse. I watch all night, and not one ghost comes forth to take its freedom of the midnight hour. Oh, have you no rebellion in your bones? The very worms must scorn you where you lie, a pallid, moldering, acquiescent folk, meek habitants of unresented graves. Why are you there in your straight row on row, where I must ever see you from my bed? That in your mere dumb presence iterate the text so weary in my ears. Lie still and rest. Be patient and lie still and rest. I'll not be patient. I will not lie still.
You get a sense of how lonely it was and how scary it was to be sick here. I think the experience of being a patient in Saranac Lake we often get from people who survived. And so we hear the happy side of things, of people who weren't that sick here. And there was a lot of that. There were romances and parties and a lot of people who really lived life to the fullest who were here ill with TB. But there was a lot of suffering too.
Those who came to Saranac Lake for the cure but expired before they could achieve it represented for more than half a century one of the village's chief exports.
The people who died here, they would take the caskets out of town quietly at night. They didn't really want to publicize that part of things. It wasn't good for business, of course. And then stored the caskets in the little building down below, the vault. And that was right there by the train tracks, and then they could take people out. So that might have been a sight that she actually saw.
I lived here since 1947, so there was still a lot of tubercular patients in the area. And my brother, when he was young, he used to deliver the trays up and down the street to the patients. Ernie Burnett lived across the street. He's the one that made the song Melancholy Baby. His sister-in-law owned the house next door, and they used to do the cooking, and my brother delivered the trays. Everybody comes to look at this house, and they see the front, and it looks like a nice little cottage. And they see 2 stories, and they come in and they start going through this house and through each floor, and they can't believe the size of it.
This house has really been useful to us in a way that's impossible to explain. I think we could have lived anywhere else in the world. We wouldn't have gotten through a couple of trials in the same way we did here. It's alive in some special way.
I'm still addicted to looking at every postcard that was sent from Saranac Lake to see if I think it was sent by someone who was curing. And it's just, I just think it's such a touching and fabulous history.